All right, welcome to part 3 of this financial analysis series, and welcome back to James Hillcoat. So James, we're going to bring together some of the thinking from part 1 and part 2, and now apply that to how we might assess overall return. So a reminder that these resources are brought to you through the Water Use Efficiency Project, which is delivered by Pinion Advisory with the help of TasFarm Innovation Hub through Australian Government's funding of the Future Drought Fund. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Joe, and great to be back with part 3. So we're going to start bringing together all those things that we've discussed in 1 and 2 in terms of making sure that you've got business margin in mind, it creates value, and we step through all those considerations we've discussed before, and we're starting to build a picture about how that opportunity presents itself within your own business. In stage 2, we've looked at the corresponding margins that we might be thinking about and the costs that are going to be incurred, and starting to use a partial budget to work out how that future cash flow might look, which will then allow us to work out how we can justify it. Again, it's well worth pointing out now as well, there are a number of tools on the NRE website in terms of assessing your own gross margins and looking at some of these tools in terms of using the capital items that we've discussed in the partial budget to then flow through to what we're talking here. So we'll talk about now about how we justify it. So looking at some of the returns profiles and how we'd go through a really robust way of assessing the merit of a project and whether or not it's worth progressing. So assessing the return, we want to get to a point where we want to know if it will achieve our hurdle rate of return. I've just pointed out again that part 2 focuses on gross margin coming down into a partial budget that's then taking into account the future, the potential cash flows and the capital items. We also need a sensitivity on that, but we'll assume we've sort of done that in this case. We're using average figures. So we can take that partial budget and move it another step and start looking at a more advanced financial tool to assess the overall return, and that would be a discounted cash flow. And then we can look at a development budget, and do we have the right funding? Do we have the right cash flow from that? So before we go on, we've spoken about hurdle rates of return and what's actually a good return. It's really a reflection of risk profile matched with capital effectiveness. So in this case, what we're looking for is a project that could achieve greater than 15% return on investment and a payback period of less than 7 years, being highly desirable. Not all of those projects exist in agriculture. So I've certainly got clients at the moment that would have a cash yield on farming property that they're looking at of sort of 2 to 3% in some cases. So what that's suggesting is that we've got quite a big gap between current cost of capital, or the interest rate that we can borrow money at, versus what the rest of the business is going to have to subsidize to buy that land. But we're also banking on capital appreciation as well. So it becomes a case of how much can we buy that fits our serviceability but still meets the required rate of return that we're looking for. There are also a number of projects within our own internal resource base, without looking outside of our farm gates and fences, that could be done on farm to maximize the productivity of that particular land or enterprise choice. And they can represent some very high and good returns on investment. So when we're making up a hurdle rate of return, we've got the first step, which is cost of capital, also known as a risk-free rate. And this is really the cost at where you borrow money from your bank, or it's an opportunity cost. So if it's cash, we could also have that invested somewhere. But for all intents and purposes, let's say this current risk-free rate is 6%. We then also want to think about some inflation expectation over time. So the value of today's dollar will be different to what it's worth in the future. And so let's assume that inflation is going to be around 2.5% per annum. And then once we've got that involved, we want to think about the risk premium. And this is what you're looking to achieve across that time frame. So particularly with land, a hurdle rate of return might be 7 to 10%. In this case, we're going to be wanting 15 because we're saying, hey, we're taking on a bit of risk. We're doing, making quite a big change to what we've currently been doing. We're going to have to upskill. We're going to have to intensify what we're doing. I actually want a pretty handy return on this to make it worth my while. And that is completely fine if we've got money invested in things and it's been worn at the business owner's risk. We should be seeking a return on that. So in this case, we want another 6.5% to get a total of 15. Again, we'll just refresh this partial budgeting. We won't go through the whole thing. That's in stage 2. But remember that we've got gains on one side we've assessed $179,000 per year and losses there of $126,000. But some of those numbers are just worth remembering. We've got that net benefit of $53,200 per year. This is a discounted cash flow. So if we take that forward, we want to know how that works out across the life of the capital item. In this case, we're saying that that lifespan is 20 years. In year 0 is when we're going to incur the initial cost, which is this $750,000, which is inclusive of the infrastructure such as the pivot, but also things like pump shed, electricity costs. It's also going to be water making up quite a big component of that. That doesn't mean that in 20 years' time, all this stuff is worth nothing. It does degrade over time, but we want to put a reasonable salvage value on some of this. So typically in this case, what we've said is that the water and things like that don't change. We haven't added capital appreciation to water in this particular setting, but we've said that most things, once they've done their lifespan, will be worth not very much. But there's still a cash influx in year 20 of $485,000. The yearly overall benefit is what we've estimated from the partial budget to be the gains from this. So the margin that's being achieved across the 50 hectares at $2,800 per hectare is roughly $180,000 per year in benefit, obviously adding back the pumping costs that we took into account there. And then we want to take out the yearly cash flows as well. So 77,000 is the operating costs that are going to come out from this. And so we've got, we're adding back depreciation. We're not interested in that because this is a cash flow budget and projecting future cash flows and how that interacts in today's dollars. So we don't include depreciation because we're not forking out cold hard cash for it. And we also don't want to include the interest component here because we're trying to work out, at what point, at what sort of level of return this is. And then working out whether or not that's going to be more than the cost of capital and whether or not it's going to reach our hurdle rate of return. So if we come down to where that hurdle rate is, that's in yellow, we've got 15% there. And if we take the net present value, which is accounting for all future cash flows and discounting them back, it's saying that we've got negative 79,000 as an overall project value. That doesn't mean that we should throw this out. It just means it's not going to meet the 15% hurdle rate of return that we're looking for. So when we consider all those cash flows, so the initial investment plus the overall benefit minus the yearly cash flow cost will give us our cash flow across that time. It's saying that we're not going to meet the 15%, but if we then look at the internal rate of return, which is a function on Excel, then we've got a rate of return of over 13%. So that's the real rate of return in this case, and saying, well, it's going to be above your 6% interest. It's going to exceed inflation based on the numbers that we've done, and it's also going to be contributing some risk premium, although not quite as much as you might have been hoping for. But it's also got a payback period of about 7.5 years. So, Joe, what do we think? Reasonable level of return in today's environment?
Well, from a non-expert, James, when you shared the hurdle rate before, we're not quite meeting that, but we're going pretty close. So I'm imagining this deserves greater discussion and thought.
Absolutely. And what we might be thinking of is have we missed anything in our assumptions? Have we overcooked it? Have we undercooked it? But yeah, it's certainly at that borderline level to go, it's not far off, and there's certainly worse things we could do in this particular instance. So should we accept the project? Well, as with everything, unfortunately, sort of. So on paper, it's fairly close. So the internal rate of return is not quite there, but it does have lots of merit. So it is adding value. It's adding a risk premium. It's saying it should pay its own way and wash its own face, which is a really important thing. But we still do need to consider cash flow and whether this is a one-off for now or part of a bigger development. So we're talking about a 50-hectare pivot. Are we talking about 150 and running 3 pivots? Is it just a one thing, or are we stepping it out? So we need to have a think about that. We also need to revisit the fit. Are we happy with the assumptions that we've used, and getting someone to overlay that, working back the economics of it? Again, it's a big change, so it's worth putting a bit more homework into. And you want to be coming at these things from a position of strength. So what it's essentially saying is we are committing to a 20 to 30 year change of direction. So it's by no means a small feat or just changing out, a dryland enterprise for another dryland enterprise. This is quite a big step change. So we want to think about a capital expenditure plan and cash flow budget too. So mapping out a cash flow budget will help to show the change coming through. And banks, if we're debt funding it, will often want to see that as well in terms of how it plays through. If we're saying that it's not going to pay its way for sort of 7.5 years, we probably want to look at, well, what happens in this period, what are the sensitivities looking like, how does that knock us around, and what's the impact on our funding structure. So it will help your bank to establish any funding requirements and perhaps additional working capital. So the working capital component is most important in the first year until you sort of set yourself at that new level. So really you're asking for that bridging finance in working capital to say, hey, we need these extra working costs. We're likely to sort of reap that benefit in 12, let's call it 12 months time, whatever it may be, and reset ourselves at a higher level. But making sure you've got really clear communication with your financier in that first 12 months is really critical. And it will also help work out the capacity for growth that your business has. So just because it works on paper may not mean your business is able to take it on just yet. And the power of yet is really important, and linking straight back to that, is your business risk profile in the same position as your risk profile? The two can differ from time to time. Stepping out a development budget, particularly when we're thinking about investing in multiple options, could also be a way of doing it too. So looking at it across a 10-year period, and so we're going to do one project here, and in a few years' time, we're going to be doing another one. So stepping that out and communicating that with your business team is a really important step to ensure that everyone follows your vision for where you think the business can go to. Particularly when we're talking about some high costs of capital coming through, We want the business team on board, and whoever that's made of, could be a husband-wife duo, it could be a bigger team, it could be an external consultant to that as well. So the summary of key takeouts here is that while we've stepped into a more advanced level of working out the returns, these tools exist on the NRE website. This was about giving you the idea about how those things work in, and so it's arming you with the right questions to ask and the right format to think it through in. But essentially what we want to be able to do to tick or flick this project is to be able to financially assess it on merit, and that's a really important step. We want to seeking help at this stage to test assumptions and ensure that they're grounded, we're not caught up in our own bias. And then working out an appropriate level of return is really important for future growth, and ensuring that it contributes value, doesn't inject unnecessary risk. Matching that with what your business can afford at that stage is also vital. And then having a sound business case for capital development is a great step in getting others on board and helping you make that decision with confidence and being backed by others.
Thanks so much, James. It's really great to be able to step through the thinking that people could be applying to these types of decisions. And I think it's really clear that obviously there's a lot of financial thinking that needs to occur, but also aligned with that, we need to be thinking agronomic, site selection, all those other things which will make sure that our assumptions are true and grounded.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. That's great.
Thanks very much for your time, James. And on the website, there'll be lots of links to resources and fact sheets and information from other modules throughout the water use efficiency project, which will have relevance to some of the things we talked about throughout this series. So just an acknowledgement for the Australian Government's future drought funding, which has supported the water use efficiency project through the Tas Farm Innovation Hub. Thanks for your time.